welcome to Cavendish's Horses, brought to you exclusively by English Heritage as part of their first ever Members Week. Thank you for your continued support. In the once industrial heartlands here in the East Midlands, the M1 motorway cuts through Derbyshire, and high above the valley on a rocky outcrop is the fairy tale castle of Bolsover. Bolsover Castle was built in 1612 by Charles Cavendish, the youngest son of Bess of Hardwick, who built the famous Hardwick Hall. It was built in a style that's quite different to other houses of the time, being that it was built in the style of a medieval castle. Now, Charles was a noted horseman, as well as a fan of architecture. And his son, William, carried on that lineage. In fact, Charles sent his son William to the finest horseman in England, Monsieur Saint Antoine, who trained Prince Henry, the son of James I. And together they formed a friendship. They were knighted together, they became members of the Order of the Bath together. And what they loved to do was to train and ride horses. And so this is why we find the riding house at Bolsover here in a little industrial town in the East Midlands. So here we are inside William's riding house at Bolsover. It is a sumptuous location for the riding of horses, and some would criticise William for spending so much upon his own horses when many people were going hungry who were working in the mines down the road. But the gentry loved and cherished their horses, and none more so than William Cavendish, whose books state again and again and again that the welfare of the horses in his mind and in his physicality are so important. But as we look around this wonderful building, where does it come from? Well, let's start with the dimensions. The dimensions of this riding house are so different to a modern riding arena. The menage, as it's called. So what we see here at Bolsover is a room which is 90 feet long by 30 feet wide. These dimensions roughly replicate the size of a tilt yard and the practice of horses therein. And if we take a look around here, we can see just special little occasions of why history can be so important. We look at the stones and see the mason's marks, where each local mason would have been paid either in piece for one stone at a time or in a whole, depending on what agreement he'd made with Smithson, the architects. We can look up and see the beams of the roof, very different from when in William's day, because they were taken away, torn away, when William was in exile in Antwerp during the Civil War. But once replaced, it was then covered with a plaster ceiling and would have looked absolutely amazing for anyone coming to be entertained by William and his riding. And just looking at some of these doorways, it's just a wonderful reminder of just how celebrated horses can be and just how much equestrians have done for history. So from the world-renowned riding house at Bolsover Castle, please join me as English Heritage present the work of William Cavendish in Cavendish's Horses. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Cavendish's Horses. Cavendish was well noted for his use of the single pillar that you can see here in the centre of the riding house. Using the pillar as a centre of the circle, a horse is worked around the pillar in both hands, that is, on his left side and his right. This helps the horse to become more supple in all his exercises and physically fit for movements that we shall display later on in our programme. Newcastle was credited for one of the movements that is known in modern dressage today as shoulder in. He described it as shoulders into a circle, where a horse marks a circle with his body, causing him to make 4 tracks with his legs, but his shoulders are inside the circle with his haunches on the outside. This makes him more pliant and very, very flexible. From the shoulder in, he may change his hand to another exercise, which in modern times is called travers. This is where the horse moves his haunches into the circle, as we see our rider doing here. And again, this exercise is excellent for the development of movements like the canter pirouette, where the horse makes very tight circles in canter upon a single plate. And once the horse's movements have been established around the pillar, he then develops his other gaits. First we see trot, trotting around a large circle inside the house, before developing that into something we see here called passage, where the horse moves powerfully from behind and has a moment of suspension in between each of his movements. This was regarded as one of the most beautiful movements a horse could do. It's demonstrated first on the right hand and then onto the left. First the normal trot, day to day, before then developing into the passage along the wall. Note how high the knees come off the ground and the powerful hindquarters pushing the horse along into the beautiful movement that you see before you. Ladies and gentlemen, Master Clive and Corralito riding Passage. We thank you. Cavendish's horses. William Cavendish is well known for his use of horses from other countries. In his book, A General System of Horsemanship, he talks about the barb horse of North Africa and Spanish horses, and particularly notes horses from the court of the king at Cordoba, where he was gifted Spanish horses, which he brought back to England. And these horses are described in his book and illustrated with their names next to them. We have the Rubichon and one particularly called La Superbe. And William describes him as being so talented that he had a misère very high and on his haunches. But many of the movements that we see are no longer seen in modern dressage, but some of them are, and these are some of them now. I shall describe first. Again, the passage. before we go to the piaffe. Let's sew that again. William cherished his horses and thought more about them than almost anything else. He cared for them. He describes in his book how we should stroke them, cajole them with our voices, never berate them, and always respect the horse, because after man, it is the most noblest of animals. We thank you. In many of the illustrations in William's book, we see horses performing airs above the ground. All these movements are given names: groupade, balotade, capriole, pesade. All of them very established for a horse who knows his job. And William describes getting the first air as the pesade, where a horse will gather himself up on his back legs, showing his belly, but not raising himself completely off the ground. And the pesade looks like this. There's the groupade. And we give the horse time to gain his breath. Settle his head. And a pesade. We've already seen this horse in low airs, the elevated movements such as the pesade. And we're going to repeat that again now in a development towards his airs above the ground. Here, in passage, he already is using his haunches very well. But our rider comes to the wall, asks him to halt, and then raise himself up the ground. Very good. Another pesade in hand on the ground, in place. Good boy. And walked on carefully, praising the horse at all points. Now he changes his hand, and in front of the doors, we'll see the iconic look from William Cavendish. And there, ladies and gentlemen, a perfect example of a pesade in front of the doors in William Cavendish's riding house. And from there, we can start to develop the horse raising himself at the front and leaping from behind. There, a start. And then he shows us his heels in a movement called, good boy, this one. Good boy. And there, the capriole, the finest of them. A touch behind that gives us the punch out. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the highest accolade a horse can reach in the mind of William Cavendish. We thank you. William Cavendish was much criticised for using his horses for performance and display. We must remember at this time that England was not just full of cavaliers. It was full of people who thought very differently to William and found that the church and a serious look at Christianity was more important, and that these dilettantes, these cavaliers, were wasting their time and money when their service could be employed to better things. Even as a young man, William was criticised for falling off his horse on Good Friday, just before he was due to enter the King's Day tournaments. The Archbishop William Laud said that he would have been better employed on such a day. William was also criticised for displaying his horses in such fanciful ways that people would say that the horse of the menage was no good and of no use. But William would fire back, angrily saying, "What do these men know? If they were to go to the wars or fight a duel, they would soon know the use of the horse in the menage." And for war, William said, there is no better training than the menage for the horse of war. So, ladies and gentlemen, when a horse is trained, he can provide this movement called passades, where he spins and turns in a tight circle, then changes his leads as quickly as if he were in battle. And it should look something like this. Ladies and gentlemen, William's horse of war. William trained his horses not only in the saddle, but also in hand, making sure that he could watch exactly what he's doing. And in-hand training is as important today than it's ever been, that you can form a bond. So you are together with your horse at all points. You can train from the ground, then train from the saddle. Really helps, especially with airs above the ground. And William would use the riding house, its high walls and wide windows, to help him with his horse. And to start, we're going to take a horse that is a little bit younger, and we ask him maybe to raise a leg. Yes, good boy. We praise calmly and quietly. We can start the piaffe, just like we did with the other hand. The switch never touching the horse, but he sees it and responds as if a fly was landing on his leg and he wants to flick it away. And from this movement here, we can then ask the horse to gather himself and start to work upon his haunches. And with the merest touch here, our horse rises. We stop and we praise. We speak softly to the horse, calmly, letting him know that he has done well and that his work today will always be remembered by those that have seen it. So let's try again. First a leg in front and another. Good boy. And then behind we ask the horse to come high. Good boy. Good boy. And love and praise is his greatest reward. So from our younger horse, we go to the more established great horse, our fine black stallion Faron, who, as you saw earlier, in the ridden work, can do so much more when he's on the ground. So each movement ending with a flourish, a note, to show some display. So let's try that again. Piaffe. Back, 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 and a flourish. That movement called the falcada. It's the way of ending your sentence. A large full stop. A large, we thank you. So from established horses to our leaping horses. We take our grey horse and we ask him for first the passade at the wall. This, a leap in hand, very nice, and he walks on. Notice how the horse gathers himself up behind. His head is kept straight, and up we go to lovely, beautiful balance, and there gives us the beginnings of a leap behind. Let's see that one more time. The passade, good boy. Ladies and gentlemen, as we gather before you, please put your hands together for first my able assistant, Miss Lisa Dixon, and the mighty Faron, our leaping specialist, Master Clive and Corralito, and here, our young Cartuhano, Icaro. And though our time together in the riding house has been short, I'd like to think together we've taken one step into England's story. We thank you. Well, yes, and also no. Some things have got better. The welfare of horses in many instances has got better. Horses are living longer because they're not worked to death anymore as they were. However, the great masters of history have got a lot to say about the welfare of horses and the training of horses because they were with horses all the time. They wouldn't have driven in a horse box to Bolsover, they would have ridden over days. So they know so much more about horses than we don't know. But saying that, there are so many different disciplines with horses that I like to think that with the advances in humanity and in veterinary care, that things are better now for horses than they were back then. But the use of the masters' books are so important to us because we can learn so much, and really Newcastle's work is as relevant today as it was back then. Yes, we do. In fact, in this display, you have seen a Carthusian PRE horse from southern Spain, from Seville, a PRE horse, again Spanish, from Madrid, and then the big, great black horse is a Lusitano cross Frisian, who again was bred in Portugal but bought in Spain and brought back to England. And these breeds are exactly the types of horses that Cavendish is talking about in his book. Historically, Spanish horses have been used by the cavalry for centuries, almost millennia, from Romans to medieval knights to Newcastle to present day working equitation. The Spanish horse is known for its bravery, its athleticism, and its stunning good looks. Well, it's taken me 25 years. I started very late. I came too late to horsemanship. Really, I should have started when I was a young boy, but I didn't. And I ended up going down different paths until I got into a medieval reenactment. In this very building is where I did my first event as a medieval reenactor. But I started off doing that, then going to portray a knight. Knights ride horses. So I thought pretty quickly I better learn to look like a knight. And it's taken me 25 years to do so. And I'm still learning. Unfortunately, at that time, yes, it was. We have to think it was a very patriarchal society. Women played a very different role. They'd really only just been allowed to start riding by themselves. But unfortunately, the society dictated that men did those type of roles at the time. Luckily, things have changed a lot. And in present day, men and women compete quite equally. But, there's very few sports and pastimes where men and women do compete equally, but equestrianism is one of them, and I think it's been a leader in that field of equality. But that's quite a long question, and we need to pick it apart because there's a lot of themes going in there. How do we balance historical accuracy? Well, that's difficult, because we can't guarantee that the horses are historically accurate, as in, are these breeds of horses exactly the same types of Spanish horses that William was using? The use of horses is always dictated by what man wants them for. So we can't exactly guess that the same type of horse that William rode in the 17th century is the same as we're riding in the 21st century. What we're trying to do is replicate a historical scenario for the public. So they come to the riding house and they learn. So therefore, we are recreating historical tack and equipment to make sure it looks exactly how it was. And we've had to learn how to use it properly, because it's irresponsible not to know how to use these tools. When it comes to talk about whips and spurs, we need to be very careful about what we understand what they're for. Now, we've seen me use a long, thin switch, which is cut from a young tree, and we use that to touch the horse to get a reaction. It's not there like you see in a show jumping or racing, where it's there to goad the horse on. It's there to gain a reaction, and you'll notice at some points it's just the visual presence of the switch that the horse takes as a cue. The same is with spurs. Spurs are often regarded as instruments of torture, and they are in the wrong feet. But if we use them correctly, that is to take the spur and point where we want the force of our leg to go. We're not pushing with a great expansive stress, going, get away, get away, get away. We're going, just move off my leg a little bit differently. So we have to use the spurs softly and responsibly. Or otherwise they can be used, like any piece of equipment, for abuse. And that's something that we never want to do. And it's something, going back to Newcastle's manuals, he talks about how men should always respect the horse. And one exact quote is that should always be a man and a beast, and not two beasts. Our horses typically start training at about 5 years of age, a little bit later than would normally be done, for example, in this country. This is because Spanish horses mature a little bit more slowly than other horses, and they're going to be doing very demanding gymnastic displays, which means that we need to build them up gradually. If you rush a horse's development physically, you will break him, and he will live the rest of his life unable to work properly. I don't want to do that to any horse. So therefore we build them up gymnastically. These are athletes we're talking about. So therefore we make sure that we take the training slowly, methodically, and especially calmly. So we develop not just the body, but also the brain. The oldest horse we have in this display is currently 13. However, we have trained and still have horses in our stables that are actually in their 20s. And like anything, age is but a number. If you keep yourself fit and active and healthy, you just keep on going. Absolutely, they do. There can be moments of unbridled enthusiasm, but these horses haven't been here in some time. They all know their place. They're all backed into their stalls straight away. They know when they're coming to Bolsover. And it's undeniable to me. Anyone that knows horses knows if a horse doesn't want to do something, you're not going to be able to make them do it. And you can get as angry as you like, but you can never make a horse do something it doesn't want to do, because it will always be you that comes off worse. Well, I think what we all have to do is continue adhering to government guidelines. We're starting to open very, very slowly, but we must remember that this is a long process. And all I can say is we're looking forward to seeing you all very, very soon.